So, I've talked about phonological properties in Swedish and morphological properties as well. In many languages, these are not enough. Other languages will use lexicosemantic properties of words to delimit inflectional classes. And such properties will be gender, animacy, transitivity for verbs. Transitive verbs will be one class, intransitives another class. Stative versus active verbs will often fall into two different inflectional classes. They will be morphologically different. Okay. So I'll start here with Sorbian. We've had it before. In Sorbian, nouns are strictly declined depending on gender. So masculine nouns receive one kind of morphological marking, while feminine nouns receive another kind of morphological marking. And that's very consistent. In the Ute, which is one of my favorite Numic languages because it was one of the first languages I actually understood when I started doing Native American languages, and it's an awesome area too. So in Ute, animacy is the decisive factor for inflectional classes. What I've shown here are sentences, because you see this clearly in context, where the subject is animate, and then we'll move, so women are singing, we'll move to a sentence where the subject is an agent, prototypical agent, and a patient that suffers from the agent's action. And finally, we go just to a stative sentence. Okay. So the plural marker appears on the woman, so the women are singing, and the plural marker is also indicated on the verb, and that is an animate subject. In the second sentence, the plural marker appears on woman after the determiner, and then it appears on the verb. The woman broke the tables. There is nothing on the noun table. Right? And the tables broke. The third sentence. There is no marking on table, and there is no marking on the verb. So, animate nouns receive plural marking. Animates do not. Animacy is the ground that determines whether you will be indicating plural in the first place. As I said, pattern is productive if it attracts members from other classes, if it is applied to new words and to loan words. If we go to verbs, we'll go through the template morphology that I talked about before. Now I think I forget which Romance language I showed, but here I'll be showing Italian verbs and their templates. So and that is a view of a paradigm that is where a paradigm is a list of forms that go into a grid. The grid is arranged in a very Indo-European Latin way. We have like a first singular, second, first, second, third singular, and then we go on to the plural. Towards the end of this lecture, I'll be presenting an alternative view to this. So we see that there are two stems. You remember what stem is? Right? I'm going to ask this on the exam. Okay. All right. So the stem is the morphological, the morpheme that accepts inflectional and endings or affixes. Okay? So here we have the stem odd and the stem ud. They're not in the indicative and in the subjunctive. They're not haphazardly scattered around the paradigm. There is a order, and the order is that the singulars, all forms of the singular, go with one stem plus the third person plural in both indicative and subjunctive. When the first and second plural take the other stem. And so we can postulate a template. It goes like this. And if we go through other Italian verbs, dovere, to have to, we can pretty much see the same thing. Okay? First, second, third, stem dev, and then the third person plural. We have the TOBB into, I think I have made a mistake here. It should be TOBB. It has a second, the second stem is TOBB. Okay. So again, the same template is repeated. Okay. So see, this template thinking is reflected in how we delimit the inflectional classes in Italian languages, but it could serve well for other languages too. Okay. The theoretical template will be first, second, third in the singular, then the third in the plural, in the indicative and the subjunctive. And if we go into the verb andare, go, that is suppletive, has two completely unrelated roots in its paradigm, we see that these roots again follow that template. They're not just accidental. This is what many people have been thinking about suppletion. Well, it just happens because these words are frequent and they can do whatever they want to do because frequency is a highly determining factor in maintaining certain forms as opposed to others. But it's not as simple as that. Even things that are very frequent like to be rhythmic, and they fall into the same rhythm as other words. So that, even being irregular, follows the overall general morphophonological template, and in that sense is in the same class. Templates are diachronically active and driving analogical leveling. Okay. The old French verb to go was a mess in the Middle Ages. It did have some really broken indicative present, but the subjunctive was awful, with 3 different stems scattered in different dialects, so I'm not sure they even understood each other. If you were really careful and just say, took one of these from one of these stems, say the stem en bois, which is one of the oldest, then you can discern sort of a template so if you have one stem that goes from the first singular, then is all through the subjunctive, maybe covering the plural, but the plural is messed up because you cannot really segment the third plural affix. And you have another stem for the first and second plural. Okay. Now this kind of, if you want to call it template, you may, because there are a few other verbs who kind of share this pattern. There are not very many, you can count them up. They're another very frequent verb to have, then the verb to suffer, and the verb to find. So it's not a very populous template. Okay. we see in modern French is that we have three stems again in the paradigm of Go. There is the V, and then the I, and then the Al. Okay, that takes. But those, there is like one stem consistent in the first plural and the second plural, and it goes through the indicative and the subjunctive. Well, if you look at that stem organization is very widespread in modern French. So the suppletive paradigm went from a shaky template with huge variation in that template to a template that was shared and was spreading. So analogy is a huge driving force into productivity.